Washington Journal continues.
Joining us from Columbus, Ohio, Thomas Wood of Ohio State University. He serves as an assistant professor of political science, here to talk to us about conspiracy theories and some people directly associated to it. Good morning.
Good morning.
Could you talk about your study of conspiracy theory and what led you to it?
Sure. So a decade ago, my supervisor at the time at the University of Chicago, Eric Oliver, and I became very interested in what we suspected would be a fringe element of American public opinion. And we started off as other students in the realm of American public opinion. We thought this would be a media effect story. That is, folks would be very sort of reliably responding and not parroting, but maybe just reflecting the political considerations that are present in the media of their choice. But what we instead observed was very, very modest media consumption differences that relate to the kinds of conspiracy theories that American survey respondents tend to express. And it was also just the scope of conspiracy belief. We imagined that this would be the remit or the responsibility, the interest of a fringe element of the American public, but really some adherence to, some subscription to conspiracy narratives was incredibly widespread in the American public. That was the first indication that what we imagined was the story of emergent media properties that came around a decade ago with this explosion in new media and the decline in old media. We realized that was just going to fail to be a compelling, satisfying account for why the American public was so conspiratorial. It instead pushed us off to think about more psychological factors that explained this proclivity.
So is that as a baseline then, we brought you on to talk about this person known as QAnon. Could you explain to our viewers who this person or group or however you decide to define it is, and particularly what influence that person has, particularly in the recent couple of weeks?
So we have to be a little bit careful when talking about these things, especially when we're talking about them enjoying the imprimatur of C-SPAN, insofar as your regular viewers probably hear about accounts from trained journalists in this channel, and they expect to invest in those accounts some degree of factual representativeness. And so we have to sort of stipulate this QAnon theory is wildly sort of speculative and broadly implausible on its face. But the claim sort of started circulating on certain chat boards at the end of last year. And the claim that it was a person who professed to have shadowy influence in American government, had access to secretive information, promised that in the coming days and weeks after the prediction was made, cataclysmic events in American politics would transpire. And shadowy networks of people who had abused the public trust and abused the innocents would be exposed, and the American system of government would be revealed to be the plaything of a shadowy network of secretive actors. And again, if it sounds like the sort of story that comprises a pitch for a Hollywood film, that's not coincidental. The story almost doesn't submit itself to factual contradiction. The other sort of amazing thing about QAnon is that among the advocates, among the adherents on these boards, it's failed every chance it's had to be vindicated in its predictions. And amazingly, when the prophecies fail, the adherents don't abandon the theory. The adherents almost cling to it more closely.
Did you see that then expressed? And we showed some photographs about it in rallies, or recent rallies with the president, and people wearing T-shirts or holding signs. What does that suggest to you about how this theory or this person has laid, or at least gripped, at least some of the imagination of Trump supporters?
Well, I guess first off, it suggests something that's maybe true about the strange people who attend rallies, during midterm elections. To my knowledge, we have no really good nationally representative survey data on the prevalence of this conspiracy theory. But really, if a large proportion of the American public adheres to this theory, they adhere to this theory because of reports, unfortunately, like the one we're involved in right now. There's a mere exposure effect. And well-intentioned newspapers go about debunking these fanciful claims, and in so doing, expose a far larger audience to the underlying conspiracy narrative than would otherwise have been aware of it. And so I would be amazed if QAnon has the sort of the durability or trenchancy or widespread belief that, like the 9/11 conspiracy theories, for instance, have, or the President Obama birtherism conspiracy theories. But it might be the case that this goes on to grip some of President Trump's supporters and become a recurrent fundamental part of his supporter base. But if I had to guess, and this is speculation, of course, it's more a function of the fact that we're in sort of the dog days of baseball, and football hasn't started back again. And so we're casting around for things to sort of talk about. And so I would be surprised if this goes on to be an enduring part of American public opinion.
Our guest is with us until 9:30. If you want to ask him questions about QAnon and what you've heard, or questions about the person or group itself, 202-748-8001 for Republicans, 202-748-8000 for Democrats, and Independents, 202-748-8002. You can also tweet us your thoughts at C-SPAN WJ. Professor, you spoke about social media in your opening statements, particularly where does this group exist on social media? And if I understand it, one of those sites is the website Reddit.
Sure. So Reddit, I mean, to my knowledge, Reddit sort of came later. Like there are more sort of shadowy, less well-trafficked websites where they're more, it's like they feature greater prevalence of white nationalist sentiment, trafficking in old school, old-fashioned, anti-Semitic rhetoric and conspiracy theories. So Reddit sort of came far later. Reddit was the prevalence of QAnon on the subreddit, on the relative subreddit, is an indication of how widely spread the 4chan and 8chan conspiracy theory later became among a larger group. But again, I just want to make this clear to your viewers. Social media is not the driving factor in American conspiracy belief. We know, for instance, that account fails for two principal reasons. First, it fails historically. Conspiracy theories about the role of Catholics and Masons in American politics roiled American society in the 19th century. Conspiracy theory in the 20th century also predates the emergence of social media. Conspiracy narratives about the Roswell alien landing or the assassination of John F. Kennedy obviously predates by decades the emergence of social media. And finally, there's a scope dimension which precludes the role of social media being the driving force of conspiracy adherence, insofar as the places where these conspiracy theories are most heavily trafficked, these fringe boards have tiny volumes of people attend to them. And yet when we ask in survey instruments the number of people who believe in the 9/11 conspiracy theory or the Barack Obama birtherism conspiracy theories, tens of millions of Americans are estimated to support those theories.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. So for those sets of reasons, social media is an important factor, but it just plainly misrepresents how we should think of a scientifically informed understanding of this phenomenon.
The website Vox did a survey taking a look at boards such as 4chan, 8chan, Reddit that you cite. When it comes to that Great Awakening board,
right,
it cited that 210 users on that Great Awakening board collectively posted a quarter of comments, 690 users posted a quarter of comments, and it goes on. It's important to say that whatever this interest is, it's a very subset of supporters overall of this president.
Exactly. And so if to the extent that now people are associating it more and more with being an ardent supporter of President Trump, that might aid the prevalence of this conspiracy theory, insofar as tens of millions of Americans are sitting at home this morning with very positive feelings about President Trump. And if it's the case that you can become an adherent to the QAnon story to be made consistent with your otherwise support for this president, that might make this conspiracy theory widely spread in a year's time, the same way birtherism became a way for other Americans who didn't prefer or support President Obama, became sort of sort of fellow travelers with the birtherism conspiracy theory as a way to sort of be made consistent with their distaste for President Obama.
Before we go to the phones, Professor, what specifically does QAnon advocate as far as the things that he claims to know as far as this administration? Give us one thing, and then we'll go to calls.
Sure. So the thing that I like the most about the QAnon story, and this is just because I'm a fan for the Parallax View and 3 Days of the Condor and the 1970s conspiracy theory movies, is the role of this numerology. And so, for instance, the QAnon folks look for any time that the word 17 is mentioned or the number 17 is referred to. And they think that is subtle signaling of insiders that they are adherents to or proponents of this conspiracy narrative. And so again, while that makes for fantastic grist to the mill, I would invite your more sort of dispassionate audience to think about how wildly implausible numerology is to be a secretive mode of communication between the American government and the American public.
First call for you comes from Ocala, Florida, Republican line. This is Tony. You're on with our guest Thomas Wood of Ohio State University. Go ahead.
Hey there. You know, I cannot believe that C-SPAN has such an unintelligent person represent QAnon when there are so many people, citizen journalists, if you will, that are available to give you the scope and the accuracy of QAnon. And this guy knows absolutely nothing. You can't believe a word he's saying. He's obviously indoctrinated in a liberal.
Tony, are you a follower of QAnon?
Absolutely.
Then what has he said? Then what has he said, and how has that borne itself out?
Pardon me?
Tony?
Pardon?
What claims has he made, and where has it come true in your mind? Give us one.
Where his predictions come true?
Yes.
Well, how about 48,000 indictments that are going to come forward here very shortly?
Which hasn't come forth yet, but is this a prediction of QAnon then?
Well, it's just part of the entire exposure of the deep state. And, you know, it's unbelievable. Like I said, there's so many citizen journalists that could give you the entire scope of this.
But since we got you on, why do you believe him? Fundamentally, why do you believe this person on this board?
Because he's accurately telling us the things that the media will not discuss.
Okay, that's Tony in Florida. Professor, go ahead.
I would suggest, I want to say to Tony in Florida, one of the lovely things about living in a democratic regime, a pluralist country, we're very racially diverse, we're intellectually diverse. I welcome and applaud you for thinking whatever you like. I'm sorry that I've let you guys down, but I want to make it clear that I'm neither advocating for or against conspiracy narratives. I study them as a scientific phenomenon of mass opinion. And so I don't mean to disparage any person who adheres to them. I want to make it clear that they are not a fringe element. It is a typical way for the average American to make sense of politics. And so every person listening this morning, you are absolutely welcome to believe whatever you like about American politics, but I would just encourage you to do this very simple trick. Go ahead and reverse the name of any political figure in any of these stories. So flip Obama to Trump. And if you find yourself less willing to believe in the theory, then that's a pretty fair indication that your partisanship, your ideology is doing some of the work here as a heuristic for believing or not believing this conspiracy theory. And so in that case, I would encourage you to go take another look at the dispassionate evidence.
Then to his point, the caller's point, has there been any claims that QAnon has made that has come out as 100% accurate?
Gosh, I mean, that's so far afield from the study of mass opinion. I wouldn't like to speak on behalf of the conspiracy theory or its adherents. I would just encourage the audience to not necessarily take my word for it, or take like the caller from Florida. Go ahead and read any established conventional news source. We have a fantastic, vital free press in this country, and we have hundreds of years of dedicated journalism and journalistic standards for what can and can't be reported in the free press, and they can inform themselves that way.
Let's go to our independent line from Minnesota. Tom, hello.
Good morning. Yeah, thank you for C-SPAN. I always appreciate tuning into you guys. I'm a supporter of Donald Trump, and I've never heard of this Q thing. And so I'm just, my first comment was going to be, you weren't explaining what some of these theories were. You said something about a numerical theory, and I kind of just chuckled. I mean, this Donald Trump supporter wouldn't get into something like that. And you guys are, in a way, you're spreading news. I'm being informed about this, so now I'm gonna have to check it out a little bit. And my final question would be, I guess, what percentage of people believe in that kind of stuff, as compared to those people who still think Elvis is alive? So that's where I'm at. Professor Wood.
I guess I want to take this caution very seriously. There is a mere exposure effect. I appear on C-SPAN, not reluctantly, but just to indicate that if anything you hear today makes you curious, go ahead and read in established news media organizations to acquaint yourself with this particular theory. And now, many sort of rigorous, well-reported stories exist, sort of checking the extent to which any of these claims have been vindicated. And I would encourage your audience to make up their own minds. On the question of conspiracy prevalence, we have really, really good data that Americans on each end of the political spectrum broadly believe in quite a large number of conspiracy theories. And some of the most interesting ones I find are to deal with health. For instance, large numbers of Americans are suspicious that natural cures for chronic diseases are being suppressed by drug companies for financial interest. Large number of Americans during the second half of the Bush administration believe that the American government had been involved in the 9/11 terror attacks. Whilst, to my mind, we have no survey data on QAnon, I would speculate at this moment it still enjoys far less support from the American public, but as I discussed earlier, it's really a political question, how widely sort of the broad currency it might enjoy in a year or two's time.
Yahoo News reporting that some of the specific things that QAnon espouses is their story saying, based solely on the word of Q, the followers, for those who follow Q, for instance, the prominent Democrats like Hillary Clinton are involved in a pedophilia ring, and that Trump is, the president is secretly working with special counsel Robert Mueller to bring it down. And then the sudden proliferation of these evidence-free claims has caused many news organizations to contemplate why they've caught fire this particular moment of time. Again, we're looking at it ourselves with our guest Thomas Wood, who joins us from Ohio State University. From Rich in Ohio, Independent Line.
Thank you. Professor Wood, first of all, I am a proud graduate of The Ohio State University with a major in political science 50 years ago. So it's wonderful to see you on representing the university and talking about a subject that's just kind of hit the media recently. My question, and I think it goes back to one of your initial comments, was that you had referenced, I think, some of the mainstream media doing some analysis on the QAnon phenomenon and trying to prove these theories false. And you seem to indicate that that wasn't the right way to go about it. And I guess as a person that's always kind of been very factually oriented, because I then went on to law school at Ohio State and believe in facts and truth. And when things are pretty preposterous, I think the right way to take them on is to kind of do some fact analysis and try to prove to people that these are false allegations and back it up with facts and other ways to disprove it. Let other people put their facts. If they feel they have facts, put it out there and let people decide. And I think newspapers and the general media do a good job of this.
Rich, thank you very much. Professor, go ahead. So, I would just echo Rich's comments. First off, I support endorsing the university. That's the most important question. And secondly, it is a question of professional judgment, because
QAnon is only one of these conspiracy narratives that get sort of trialed in online media online fora, and most of them fizzle very, very quickly. And so I think the audience would agree that it's not the responsibility or a good use of journalists' time to hang out on these forums and take every wildly fanciful claim at its face value and then dedicate journalistic resources to reporting or not these claims. So it is a matter of professional judgment. I think they have to wait until they observe some circumstantial evidence that large numbers of people are adhering to these stories, and there the exposure effect is offset by some sort of correction effect, as Rich, I think his name was, rightfully indicate. And so my caution is just that I'm sort of creepingly aware of how many of these stories are, how many of these theories are trialed at one time or another. And so given the broad opportunity and the broad number of those, most of which never gain any traction, any audience, I wouldn't think it's a good use of our journalistic resources, of our nation's free press, to sort of run all those stories down. But it is a balancing act, as the caller indicates.
Republican line from Florida. Laurie, hi.
Hi. I wanted to ask if QAnon had any belief in the fact of the claims that Edward Snowden had made to the deep state being consisting of the Federation of Societies, secret law, unequal pardon, and executive order.
Professor, go ahead.
Gosh, that sort of terminology, I would invite you, if you really want to have like the specifics with that terminology, I would encourage you to just use a search engine. The complicating factor is there is few canonical versions, of course, because it's a folk theory, really. Canonical versions as to what is and is not included, and so that kind of specificity. I'm not equipped or trained to speak to the truth or falsity of this particular account. I more study the typical psychological response.
And so then, as far as one of those psychological responses, video being one of those features of QAnon. In fact, if you go to the Great Awakening site, there are several videos posted by this person. We'll just show you a portion of it.
By now, you may already be aware that America was on the verge of being completely destroyed by a gang of very powerful criminals who had made their way right into the heart of power. We didn't notice because they had become our most trusted leaders, entertainers, and politicians. But then things changed. In 2016, patriots in the U.S. military took back power legitimately with the election of Donald Trump. Plunged directly into the damage and sickening destruction caused to America and the world. They got to work dismantling the branches of this powerful secret shadow government that was in the process of siphoning off America's vast wealth to their global masters. After 2 years of a dramatic covert operation that was to include the gutting of the corrupt CIA, FBI, and Justice Department, they now face the last remaining pillar of the deep state, their vast media empire.
Professor Wood, aside from the content specifically, what do you think about the power that these videos will add, particularly to the perpetuation of this the impact of Q?
There are some very effective videographers and narrativists in this community. I would encourage your audience to sort of like look at what was they just saw and think about it. Is it really that different to the way trailers to conspiracy movies are made? It's compelling, stimulating stuff. And so I don't deny the allure of these. I enjoy paperback novels as well. But I would just encourage your audience, if anything that we've heard on this broadcast this morning has made them interested, go to a search browser, go to any of the national news media outlets and inform yourself that way. And if, like some of the callers, you become very convinced, that's fantastic. There's an online community where you can enjoy describing this conspiracy theory to your heart's content.
Christopher is in Philadelphia, Democrats line.
Hi, Thomas. This is Chris from Philadelphia here, and I am just applauding your bravery to just come on and talk to some of the proponents of this theory, because I've met some, and it gets very intense. You're going to have lots of dots connected, And somehow in this entire grand scheme, Donald Trump is the hero. So just get ready. And I just wanted to let you know that once Pedro put up that mirror to the guy from Florida, as soon as they're presented with any sort of pushback or, hey, do you have any facts to back that up? Maybe a source? Nothing. So just take it with a grain of salt, and I encourage C-SPAN to have more things like this because it's needed, because a lot of people are scared to sort of push back against this sort of intensity.
Thank you, caller. Professor Wood.
Gosh, I never thought of what I was doing as brave. That's made me a little bit concerned. No, look, I'm a migrant to this country. I'm an American citizen now, but I love chatting with Americans about politics. I teach at a large state university. All kinds of ideas are expressed in my classroom. It's not my position to disabuse any person of their conservative, moderate, or liberal ideology. I think that the caller is onto something insofar as the success of this particular conspiracy theory is owed in at least some part to the way in which it taps into the current partisan divide, so that it allows people who otherwise feel very positively disposed to certain national political figures. That is a very useful thing for making the conspiracy theory more current and more sort of widely trafficked.
Professor, from your research, is there a common denominator for those people who adhere to conspiracy theories?
Sure. So in the book that Eric Oliver and I is coming out in about a month now, Enchanted America, we find two sort of basic cognitive styles, a rationalist and an intuitionist cognitive style. And so intuitionist cognitive styles tend to be apparent among folks who've had a little less formal education, tend to be a little bit more religious, tend to have a little bit of a lower income, and among those folks, the impulse to subject these sort of narratives to intellectual rational scrutiny is a bit suppressed, and instead they enjoy the intuitive appeal of these stories. Now, I would just caution you, we all at some time use intuition and magical thinking and symbolic reasoning in our lives. So any sports fan who has willed a field goal to be kicked by covering their eyes and going to the special corner in their living room at a clutch point in any particular sporting event knows that we all can become susceptible to intuition and symbolic reasoning under feelings of emotional anxiety. And so nothing in the research is meant to disparage people who adhere to these claims, and I just want to sort of affirm that it is a widespread manifestation in American mass attitudes.
From Pennsylvania, Independent Line, Nicholas, hello.
Hello and good morning. Greetings. Welcome to the Q. Where we go one, we will go all.
Are you a follower of Q?
What's going on? Well, let's put it this way. After what happened with our election and Bernie, can you blame them? And Mockingbird Press, and I say Mockingbird because that's the operation the CIA has, or the deep state. In other words, we've been lied to a long, long, long time. It's over.
So, Nicholas, a couple of things. Are you a close follower of this Q?
Close, no. But it's been since October of last year. Where the hell has everybody else been?
What drew you to this? What drew you to this initially?
Well, to get the real info, because you ain't going to get it on TV. You're not going to get it through press. You're not going to get it through watching a Disney Channel or even Fox News, because there's a lot of stuff they're not allowed to talk about, like Fukushima. What happened there?
Okay, that's Nicholas. And Professor, this was also on that Q Reddit site that I mentioned. It particularly addresses the media. It says our media today has been overtaken by entities with the goal of establishing a global government that requires absolute control of the media and the message they deliver. Mainstream investigative journalism has been shut down. Q is breaking that stronghold by building a new media of independent researchers that are not controlled by any outside entity. Let truth reign. with all that in mind, take that as you will. Go ahead.
So I would suggest one of the sort of the recurrent properties in these theories among their core adherents. So these are not folks who have some level of agreement, but these are folks who spend all the time on these boards, really enjoy like mapping out all these connections. They're in a sense they're self-sealing. That is, every time they're exposed to some sort of external factual correction, they have an account for this. And so it's not coincidental that the American press, all the way from the very conservative mainstream press to the very liberal mainstream press, are all sort of wrapped up in a theory, and they're all sort of they're accounted for, and their opposition is not given to contradict the claim, but instead, in a strange way, the more evidence that stacks up against the claim is actually evidence for the conspiracy in the mind of its adherents. And so, in a sense, I would encourage those folks who are dealing with people in their lives who are who are very sort of central to the QAnon narrative. I don't know that talking with those folks and exposing them to factual correction is a very productive way to proceed. But people who are just merely exposed and have some level of familiarity with the claim are probably willing to sort of objectively appraise this conspiracy theory's diagnostic and prescriptive capacity. And so all these prophecies have been made now for the last year and a half. And if its adherents are vindicated, it doesn't really matter what some Big Ten professor is saying on public access TV. They'll be vindicated in history.
Our guest, an assistant professor at the Ohio State University. He teaches political science, also the author of a co-author of the forthcoming book, Enchanted America. We'll go to Michigan next. Republican line, Kirk, hello.
Hey, good morning, Pedro. Thomas, good morning. Thank you for C-SPAN. This is a fascinating conversation, but one of the issues that I'd like to bring up is I've heard of QAnon. I'm a staunch conservative Republican. Heard of it, dismissed it from the very beginning when I first saw it, and as it is, just a fanciful conspiracy theory. But what I'm curious about with Thomas in particular is you encourage people to go directly to journalistic reports to find facts. And as a conservative Republican, I'm just amazed that you would. How do I want to put this? You seem to want to just rely upon journalism, and we know for a fact over a year and a half that journalism isn't really accurate either. There's conspiracy theories within the journalistic community, and you don't seem to want to question that at all. And of course, in particular, with the Russian conspiracies with the Trump administration, which are now seeming to disintegrate before our very eyes. So I'd like you to comment on that.
Kirk, can I ask you a question before you leave us?
Sure.
You said you dismissed it. What caused you to do that? And in your course of, have you ever run into a supporter of this Q, or at least someone who knows about it?
No, Pedro, I haven't. And I dismissed it because it just was on its face was very unrealistic. It kind of went back to the 9/11 conspiracies, which I dismissed, things like that. So I just threw it away at the very beginning.
Okay. Thanks, Kirk. Appreciate that. Professor Wood, go ahead.
So, to Kirk's point, sure, journalism is a human endeavor, and when they fail, the consequences are really bad. It seems to be the case that the American press enjoys far less popular standing than it once did. The extent to which it enjoys respect along the ideological spectrum has degraded. We have got excellent survey evidence now that has been taking place for decades and decades. But I guess I would still encourage Kirk to think about the United States compared to other countries around the world. And if a free press isn't the way you would like the American public to become acquainted with the factual circumstance of current events, there doesn't seem to be a very compelling alternative anywhere else in the world. And so for all its failings, I would humbly suggest that I encourage my students, and I hope we should all be encouraged in the nice open democracy we have, It's a redoubtable strength of the American democracy how vital and factually informed the American press is. And so if you don't like the New York Times and the Washington Post because you regard it as not sharing your political priors, the Wall Street Journal does excellent news reporting and has a far more conservative editorial page. And so hopefully somewhere along the ideological spectrum, there is factually informed news reporting that comports with your tastes.
Let's hear from Rich in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Independent Line.
Hi, how you doing?
Fine, thanks. Go ahead.
I would like to, comment on alone on the JFK assassination. They keep saying they're going to release all the files. They said after 50 years. 50 years has come and gone. Trump said he went to release more files on the JFK assassination, and they were redacted by the CIA and FBI. And according to the Q, the major people still in our government was involved in the assassination. Also, with Joe Manchin from the Democrat, his daughter works for the opioid companies, which help flood our country with tons of opioids. Now, how do you explain these things when they're not put in the American press?
Professor Wood, go ahead.
So a lot to deal with the Kennedy assassination. Millions of gallons of ink have been spilled. I applaud the American public for their residual interest. I guess just as a scholar of mass attitudes, I don't feel qualified to make a statement about either of the fact claims that the caller presented.
Are you surprised by the longevity of some of these theories?
So the JFK conspiracy theories, I think, are a very sort of idiosyncratic, quirky, unusual episode of American history insofar as people who were alive during the subsequent government investigations, a dispassionate consumer of news media would have inadvertently adopted a lot of the traits that we might otherwise regard as quite conspiratorial, made it into the mainstream sort of discussions of this. The Oliver Stone film, of course, presented a very sort of cogent case for the highly conspiratorial account of the JFK assassination. And so I suggest that the JFK assassination is probably an exceptional case for its ability to be a long-lasting conspiracy with the American public. But it is a recurrent question. We have excellent, Gallup has been asking this question now for decades and decades, and it's a stubbornly persistent conspiracy theory.
Joe is in Pennsylvania, Republican line.
How you doing? They're saying that everyone's talking about a conspiracy theory, but since Donald Trump's been in office, he's exposed things like senators using or congressmen using taxpayer money to settle secret lawsuits that nobody knew about. They wouldn't say anything about their names. Also, like the budget. Nobody's willing to cut it or trim out the fat. And I don't know, it just seems even the FBI not turning over documents. Does that not seem like there's some secret government?
So, Joe, before I let you go then, do you believe there is a secret government as you described it, and do you use those things that you just told us as fact, or are there other things you consider?
Well, I mean, it is a fact that congressmen settled lawsuits with taxpayer money, and it wasn't told to the American people. And it also is a fact that there's been requests by Congress for documents from the FBI, and they refuse to give them or give them redacted. The election's over. There's no need to classify all that. And the Russians know that we know. So why not release all this evidence?
Okay, but let me take it a step further then. When you say secret government, exactly what do you mean?
I mean a government that refuses to comply with the order of the people who are in charge of it. Congressmen make requests to the FBI. They need to honor that and do it. We're going round in circles to get documents that they should freely present. That doesn't need to be classified to senators and congressmen, and the American people have the right to know.
Okay. Professor Wood, I suppose that idea of the right to know, or at least the interest of knowing these inner workings of the government, that I guess drives people's interest in maybe adhering to a conspiracy theory if they do so.
Sure, but I guess the complication is the human capacity for pattern recognition might sometimes steer people in the wrong direction. That is, as I'm sure the caller is aware, requests for documents between the executive and legislative branch happen every day, hundreds of times a year, and enjoy no public scrutiny or no public profile just because it's the part of a working of a democratic government. And so I am sort of a little bit skeptical about the extent to which conspiracy theorists connect just the quotidian happenings of American government and use them for for factual support for these conspiracy theories. I mean, I guess as a small d Democrat, it's lovely that Americans are becoming more interested in government, and hopefully as folks seek out information in support of or against it, their preferred conspiracy theory, we can improve the public's awareness of how our federal government works.
One more call from Barbara in Chincoteague Island, Virginia, Republican line. Go ahead. You're on with our guest.
I'd like to talk about the JFK assassination. In the 70s, I was traveling in upstate New York, and I was having breakfast in a diner with a friend. And this man came up to our table and gave us a flyer about how JFK had been assassinated. And it was all about conspiracy theory. And we thought he was crazy. My husband and I at the time, even though I'm calling on Republican line, were very involved in Democratic politics and worked for the Kennedys. Down the line, fast forward to now, we found out about the Cuba CIA involvement, about JFK's involvement with the mafia. And if you take a poll of Americans now, a great majority, a huge amount, believe there was a conspiracy. Oh. And what I think is sometimes these are conspiracies, and sometimes it needs years to come out, and we find out much more that our government or other people have done.
Gotcha. Barbara, thank you so much. And since you addressed JFK, Professor, one more question then. How do you tell then how QAnon fits in the scope of longevity, or at least impact in the long run? How could we measure that?
So eventually researchers or public media polling will start doing asking questions about QAnon conspiracy adherents. If we see a large number of American survey respondents express familiarity and awareness of the QAnon theory, we'll keep asking about it. And so in a way, it doesn't matter like what one individual researcher says or does. The ingenuous answers of Americans to survey research will drive this process. And those of us who study conspiracy theories, we have a vocational interest in the prevalence of these theories, and so I will gladly spend the coming years of my career studying the prevalence of this, and I'm far from alone. Many people are studying the prevalence and correlates of these attitudes. Enchanted America is the forthcoming book that takes a look at the topics that we've been talking about and the larger aspects of conspiracy theory. Thomas Wood of Ohio State University joining us for this discussion. Professor Wood, thanks for your time today. No, thank you.